In the course of my research for the book, and of course over 55 years, I've encountered a number of different things that it seems that not everybody knows for one reason or another. Perhaps people are latecomers to The Prisoner, perhaps they've not picked up the particular book. So I thought that what I'd do was do 18 things that you may not know about The Prisoner. And it'll be a bit of a romp really, but we'll go with it. And I chose 18 because I wanted to be different rather than 17. So, I'll number them. First one, McGowan talked of 7 essential episodes. And in an interview that he gave in 1990 to Howard Foy, he said, "Ideally 7 would have been enough. A proper progression shown in sequence. We know 3 of them. Arrival has got to be 1. Once Upon a Time and Fallout, that's 3. Chimes of Big Ben is another. Many Happy Returns, another. Free for All." But he stopped. Having said 6, the conversation went on to another topic and wasn't returned. So it's a guessing game that you can play on what do you think is the 7th episode. I asked a few members of the team and a couple of other friends, and this is what I gleaned from them. One each thought that, first of all, Schizoid Man. Now, another said, well, it's either Dance of the Dead or it's Hammer into Anvil. 2 said, well, it's obviously Checkmate. And another one said, well, it's either Checkmate or it's A Change of Mind. Then someone said, no, I think it's The Girl Who Was Death. So we can play a jolly good game and wonder what on earth that 7th one is. Bear in mind that McGowan directed a couple of episodes, Many Happy Returns and A Change of Mind, as the pseudonym Joseph Surf. And there we are, he's mentioned one, hasn't he? Many Happy Returns. He rang up Louis Griefer, who wrote The General, and said how much he liked it. But then, does Checkmate have the themes? You know, it's got a lot of psychology in it. So that's number 1. You can take that away and ask others what they think. Answers on a postcard. Now, this second one is very, very short, and in a way, a number of these will be like exposing the magician's trick. We think, what a fantastic trick the magician does. When we find out how it's done, we think, oh, is that it? So, be warned. When McGowan resigns, what's he actually saying? Well, in the 1990s, I was involved in the hearing impaired community. So I asked someone who had been hearing impaired since birth if they could lip read, and they said yes. He says, right, you and me are finished, I'm through, I've cut. And again, this also is a bit of ruining the magician's trick. The elusive number 7. Why is there no 7 in the village? Well, of course, initially in 405 lines, black and white, you only see the notice board in Arrival for 2 seconds. And so you never really pick up the idea that the 7 is missing, not for some time. Nadia in Chimes of Big Ben was going to be number 7, but was changed to 8. And so it's only really by thinking about this and considering it that you realise that there is no 7. So why? Why is it? Okay. Is it perhaps that the number 7 was considered unlucky? Sterling Moss, the racing driver, said it was his favourite number and he liked to race with that number? Or was it to ensure that he could not be confused with 007 James Bond? Get that out of the way. Or was it just another deliberately cryptic puzzle? Perhaps in their haste they forgot to pack the box of sevens. No, I'm afraid not. I'll tell you what it is. It's actually very mundane. The purpose was to ensure that the village could not be pinned down to anywhere. So, that's the Continental 7 which would have given the game away. Alternatively, if it didn't have the bar through it, we're in Britain or America or elsewhere. So that's the real reason why the 7 was abandoned. Okay, number 4. Chimes of Big Ben. There's that wonderful journey that Nadia and number 6 make by air, sea and whatever else. And they don't even have a comfort break. They've got nothing to eat and nothing to drink. So where did that idea come from? I'll tell you. Most writers get their ideas from what happens in life. In 1964, Australian Reg Spears successfully air freighted himself from London back to Australia because he couldn't afford the fare. The journey took 63 hours. Hearing of this, a Welshman in Australia, Brian Robson, who wanted to get back to Wales and again couldn't afford the fare, decided to do the same thing. However, it didn't go well. Various issues meant that after 5 days, confined in a 3-foot by 3-foot by 2-foot packing case, he had only got as far as Los Angeles. Fortunately, he was discovered and he was far from well, as you can imagine. He could have been prosecuted, but fortunately fate smiled upon him and the airlines flew him back to London first class. We know that the big white balloon is called Rover, and we learn this in Schizoid Man. So just how does the P know that it's called Rover? Because he's told it in Arrival, but it's cut. The first cut of Arrival ran to 90 minutes. It had to be reduced to 50. And most scenes were tightened. Only 1 or 2 scenes were jettisoned altogether. But unfortunately, this was one of them. And that's why you have this real puzzle. When there's a Rover smothering scene, we would have heard this exchanged. Number 6 would have said, "What was that?" The answer, "Rover." The P, "Rover what?" Number 2, "Just Rover." Number 6, "Who drives it?" Number 2 with a puzzled look, "Drives it? Yes, who?" Number 2 would laugh pleasantly. That would be telling. So that's how we would learn. Okay, number 6. Alert warning, magician's trick. I said that McGowan had decided to use his pseudonym, Joseph Surf, for 2 episodes, and a number of prisoner scholars have wondered why he settled on that name, and the reason is that Joseph Surf was the main protagonist in a book written by Hermann Hesse called The Glass Bead Game. And Hermann Hesse was a great advocate of the freedom of the individual. He was German, and at one point he was Hitler's #1 target, so he escaped and went to Switzerland. Joseph Surf translates, well, the original name is Knecht, but surf, you know what a surf is, You know, it is someone who does serfdom, not a free man, and so it was obviously thought that this was deliberate. But however, McGowan, when asked, said that he'd heard of the book but never read it. And so why did he choose this name? Well, he said he quickly had to think of a name, and he was saying, oh, it was just a fictitious name I made up. First thing that came into my head, I probably had a picture of an ocean on my desk, even though it's not spelt that way. There you go. Of course, we can't not talk about George Orwell's book 1984, because it's become part of our social fabric, with its slogan, Big Brother is watching you. This term has entered the lexicon as a synonym for any government abuse of power, particularly in respect to civil liberties, and is obviously related to mass surveillance. These days, of course, it might well apply to multinational companies too, and all the many harvesters of information. Orwell finished the book in 1948, and he simply reversed the last two figures. How it came about, because Orwell was very socially concerned, and he had witnessed Stalin's purges and show trials in the 1930s, and how the USSR, far from embodying communism, had in fact become a totalitarian state run by a tyrant. Related to that, number 8, the idea of no names, just numbers, as a way of lessening an identity. It wasn't new. Where does it come from? I mean, one only has to think, of course, of the Holocaust. If you give someone a number instead of a name, you emotionally distance them. They become a commodity. In science fiction, the 1921 Russian novel We, written by Evgeny Zamyatin, introduced a dystopian world with narration by the main protagonist, D503. The novel set in a society of total conformity, and it influenced the emergence of dystopia as a literary genre. Published in the West in 1924, some thought that Aldous Huxley drew upon it for his 1931 novel Brave New World. Orwell, in his writings, found the resemblance striking, and his review of We praised the book's intuitive grasp of the irrational side of totalitarianism. 3 years after writing those words, Orwell published 1984. Number 9. The term is coined unmutual. Where does it come from? Unmutual. Well, in a sense it was stolen. It's a clever adaptation from both 1984 and Stalin's Russia. Because Stalin, if he wanted to get rid of a political rival or somebody that he wanted gone, they would disappear, not just physically, but in every other way. All reference to them would be removed. In writings, in photographs, they would be airbrushed out. The most striking example would be Leon Trotsky. So these people were erased from history. Number 10. Why Living in Harmony was not shown in the United States in its first run. Urban myths. Okay, over the years there have been urban myths. One was, well, because it features hallucinogenic drugs, doesn't wash, because hallucinogenic drugs are in a number of episodes. Then it became, well, hang on, the Vietnam War was going on, and this episode isn't about escape, it's about rejecting violence. So, okay, you can have that in Portmeirion, but if you're showing a Western in America at the time of the Vietnam War, and the main protagonist is rejecting violence, that already will add fuel to the flame that's burning of all the young men burning their draft cards. So that became why it was thought wrong. Okay, we come to two more things. When they were due to show the chimes of Big Ben, there was an overrun on the Bobby Kennedy funeral proceedings. So they didn't show it and it was shunted to the following week. So they had to lose an episode. But in fact, the likely real answer, and this is in the Television Academy Foundation, which began to record and archive an oral history of American TV in 1997. And a CBS programming executive, Henry Coleman, said, when discussing The Prisoner, he said something had happened, that if this show went on, it would be an embarrassment to the network, as though we were insensitive to the fact this person had been murdered. He's not able to resemble and remember the circumstances, but there have been, in this country, notable instances of children emulating scenes that they have seen on TV, resulting in, for example, hangings. Okay, so that's censorship for an entirely laudable reason. Number 11, the alternative arrival and chimes of Big Ben. You've probably seen these now because thanks to really Bruce Clark, the late US coordinator for the society, he spotted films for sale advertisement in a film collector's publication and realised something was up. The advertisement featured dozens of ITC 16mm prints for sale. Checking with ITC, Bruce then read them the list of titles included. The silence at the other end later revealed their shock. These were titles that ITC had paid their storage facility to destroy after transmitting the masters to video. Instead, they found their way out of the back door and into collectors' hands. Among these prints was the alternate version of Arrival. Roger Langley said to me, "I have a feeling that the 16mm prints were for preview to attract interest." These were the first two episodes that were finished, and that they got shown in error because it had been brought to Bruce's notice that an alternate, Chimes of Big Ben, had played in Canada. So that's how they got out. Well, for those who want to know a bit more about Fallout and how we got there, item 12. In the early 1980s, there was an independent prisoner group who published a little fanzine called Once Upon a Time, and one of their number interviewed Bert Elms, who of course wrote some of the music. And in the interview, Bert Elms said this about McGowan. He sat in that chair and told me all about his trouble with Mark Stein and others. It's all got out of hand, Bertie. They want to make it into a Bond movie, and if there's one thing it ain't, it's another Goldfinger. I'm putting the bloody thing to sleep before it gets up and bites back. Okay, on to the number 13. Politics is a big thing in The Prisoner, particularly in, of course, Free for All. And there's a saying, under capitalism, man exploits man. Under communism, it's just the opposite. Yeah, quite good. So at this point, have we actually changed since The Prisoner was shown? Is democracy now holding sway around the world? No, I'm afraid not. Since 2010, there's been a decline in democracy. The 2021 report from the Economist Democracy Index says this: 167 countries are taken into account. Full democracies, 21. That's all, 21. Flawed democracies, 53. Hybrid systems, 34. Wait for it. Fully authoritarian regimes, 59. In order, Norway comes out top, New Zealand's second, the UK comes out 18, US 26. Going down the scale, Russia 124th, China 148th, North Korea 165, Myanmar 166, and then Afghanistan is last. Here's a little something that you can do at home. Surveillance. Well, we're only too aware of all the surveillance that goes on in the village, but if you've got something like Alexa, you're under surveillance. Ask Alexa, Alexa, do you gather our data? The answer I got was, I don't have an answer for that. Keep pressing, Alexa, keep asking variations, you'll be surprised where it goes. Now, the A, B and C script, it's kind of recognised that there's a series that was called Counter-Strike that was on the BBC in 1969, and it lifted the plot of A, B and C, written by Anthony Skene, who wrote A, B and C. Anthony Skene said, I had to produce a script very quickly, I didn't know what to do, so I transformed A, B and C. But what people don't know was that he wrote this particular script called Nocturne in 1966 before writing A, B and C. But the series was shelved because ITV was showing another series that ran along very parallel lines called The Invaders, but they resurrected it when it had died down. Number 16, brainwashing. That's a term coined by journalist Edward Hunter, who had served in the morale operations section of the US Office of Strategic Services during the Second World War. He wrote a book, Brainwashing in Red China, the calculated destruction of men's minds. He explained that brainwashing was his translation of the Chinese term Shi Nao, spelled H-S-I-N-A-O, which simply means cleansing of the mind. The Manchurian Candidate book and twice a film, of course, appeared as a result of the Korean War and influenced a number of prisoner scriptwriters, amongst them Roger Parks. Number 17, at the press screening in September 66, the first two completed episodes were screened, Arrival and Chimes of Big Ben. Given that the first screening was Canada, I'm guessing that's how the alternatives sneaked out, as I said earlier. Normally, on any film or production, there's one editing suite. Here, there was no episodes completed, so they had 4 editing suites going. So I suspect that the episodes were screened as they were completed, and that's why we got the order that we got. That's my suspicion. Do Not Forsake Me wasn't ready until it was screened 13th here, though it's 9th in America. 17 plus 1, we're there. I got to thinking about this. As some of you may know, I worked with Ian Rakoff, helping him with his book, Inside the Prisoner, which I recommend. You can buy it second hand. It's a really good read, tells you what it was like working on the series. And he writes in it, he writes about a character who worked on the Prisoner in the editing suite, chap called, he calls him Mark Davies. His name was actually Martin. Mark was motivated by absolute faith in all that Patrick McGoohan was trying to do. He idolised McGoohan and was proud of his association with the series. Mark was in touch with the latest, most way out music living the macrobiotic way, health foods, brown rice. A hippie. I had once seen Pat chatting with, or should I say listening to Mark. I noticed Pat eyeing Mark intently and wondered what had sunk in. Later, on seeing the final episode Fallout, I suspected that quite a lot about Mark's character had registered on Patrick. The part played by Alexis Canner in that last episode, I felt, in the writing to be influenced by Mark. Well, I met at Martin, I met him at Ian's, had dinner there, and I've spoken with his son subsequently, who's told me quite a lot of stories about his dad. The Beatles, particularly John Lennon, visited their home quite often. Hippiedom was making its presence felt. The alternative way of living, health foods, music, ways of thinking, all ran through Mark. And I think that influenced McGowan. Canner, of course, took it, ran with it, and made it his own. Thank you. All of these things and more will, of course, be in the book. Thank you.